Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. I'm going to apologize right now. My ear is majorly clogged, and so my own voice sounds really weird and echoey to me. So we're going to try to get through this with my sanity intact. But today I am reviewing Changelings, a trans anthology edited by Ryan Vale and Ocean Riley. This is a standalone anthology focusing on trans and autistic characters. It is not connected to any press as far as I know. Now, when I looked into this one, I was originally sent the review request by one of the editors because I had reviewed one of their stories in a different anthology very similar to this one. But the anthology that they were published in was trans characters, specifically in horror settings. And that's what most of the anthologies that are focusing on specific identities do. I've been published in one that was sapphic stories in nautical settings. You usually want to bring a secondary kind of curation beyond just the identity. You want something else because most people have specific genre tastes and genre preferences. So you kind of want to have a specific vibe you're going for even within that identity construct, and this one didn't really have that. The disparity of the genres is vast. Very vast. You have everything from really cutesy high school romances to body horror to dystopian to space battles, and there's so much difference between each of the stories that it can feel like tonal whiplash between all the genre switches. And I do wish that if they were going to do literally every kind of genre, that they would have created some kind of gradient system, I guess you could say, because there are stories that are like purely just contemporary, then some stories with like light speculative or magical realism elements, and then full on in a different world speculation. So I would have liked it if we could kind of like arc it, create an arc of the stories where it gets like increasingly speculative the longer you read. I feel like that might have helped a little bit of the tonal whiplash. But the big thing we got to talk about here is what this book was trying to do and how it low-key set itself up to fail in its goal. Now, I always try to review a book based on what it was trying to do. What was the end goal? Did it achieve that? I'm not going to fault a horror novel for not giving me the warm fuzzies. For example, this book, this anthology, according to its marketing, kind of had a really big goal in mind, and it didn't do the anthology any favors because it basically wanted to be a nonfiction piece on transness and autism, and that's a lot to ask. Other people have talked about it, about how there's no trans femme voices in the anthology. I didn't know that was a thing because when the email was sent to me, it was advertised as a trans mask anthology, which I think was a pivot when they realized they had no trans femme stories. But there is this kind of idea of the vibe of a lot of the marketing on the Goodreads page and on the Kickstarter feels like the anthology wanted to be like a giant educational piece for like the entire trans autistic experience. And that's a really dangerous goal to set up for yourself. That is, well, first of all, it's impossible for any small group of voices to ever represent an entire community. No community is a monolith. But also, and other people have said it in reviews, I don't know this for certain, that the cast of authors is mostly white. I don't know any of the races or ethnicities of any of the contributing authors, so I'm not going to speculate, but if that is true, that furthers this is not a great cross-section of the community. But again, I wouldn't be bringing this up of who wasn't put in and who isn't here if they hadn't set up this giant goal for themselves. Also, side note, it looks like the Goodreads synopses on the Goodreads page comes from the Kickstarter directly. And so it has the line, something to the effect of, "We expect support from allies and those who want to learn about trans autistic lives." That is not a great look to have on a Goodreads page, because it sounds like we expect you to read this or you're not an ally. And I'm really sure that's not what they were going for, because on a Kickstarter page, that sentence reads very differently, but the change in context, not doing them any favors. quick edit. I went back and looked as I was editing this, and they did change it. So there's no more "we expect support" rhetoric in the Goodreads page, but just a heads up, a Kickstarter page and a Goodreads page are very different contexts, and you gotta be careful directly copying and pasting, but I do appreciate that the editors seem to be learning as they go. I just wish a little bit more care had been taken ahead of time. So I really wish that this anthology would have aimed at a lot more realistic goal rather than trying to be a big educational tool, which, y'all, we should not be encouraging people to view fiction books as educational tools. The Own Voices tag has already screwed us over with that mindset. This is just people of this marginalization, cross marginalization, getting their voice out. That's what this should be. And all this talk of being the educational piece, of being the cross section of the whole community, that's a little too big. But let's look at the stories themselves. Now, I fully expected the weird stuff to be my bread and butter, because it usually is. I've reviewed books on sentient potatoes taking over the world and body horror involving sock puppets. I really thought the weirder ones were gonna get me, but no, for whatever reason, my brain decided it was in a cutesy contemporary mood when I read this book, because the stories like, what was I looking at here? Hyacinths and Other Purple Plants by Alex Laquege. I really should have looked that up beforehand. But also Don't Play With My Heart by Ray Reese Phillips. But that is also because I am a giant TTRPG nerd. So that was always going to appeal to me. A story about someone working in a TTRPG coffee shop. Like, I want to go to that shop. Can I go to that shop? Can I join their Monster of the Week one shot? But regardless, I also liked, let me look here, Ms. Morla David. It's a Jewish story by Dorian Yosef Weber, and I have here Always with the Gay Romance. There's a lot of gay romance. I don't think there's a single straight trans dude in this entire anthology, but it is very heavily based on Jewish culture, and I saw another reviewer who was also Jewish that was like, oh man, the analogy of this thing as autism did it, like, apparently it was really cool. I don't know enough about the culture to say for certain, but apparently that was really cool. So yay for that. But the biggest disappointment for me, where am I looking here? The biggest disappointment, the story that I should have loved just based on who I am as a person, is Fate Turns the Light On by Rafaela Rule. This one is a space opera, which right out of the gate, space opera. If you have watched my channel for a hot minute, you know that's one of the top genres for me. But this one was also, according to the foreword, because every story had a foreword explaining what the author was doing with their story, explained that this was supposed to be an analogy both for school shootings and for fascist right-wing attacks on queer students. Which, okay, again, really big goal, but I work in an elementary school, and I am trained in how to handle school shootings. I literally have to wear a special key on my lanyard meant to lock a door from the inside in case of an intruder. Like, I have to be trained. I have fucking listened to the Columbine 911 recordings so often. So I'm like, okay, big setup. So I went in, and honestly, I would have liked the story more without the foreword. Because without the foreword, it just reads like a space battle with a trans autistic main character. It just reads like a regular space opera space battle. And I love a space opera space battle. One of my favorites. I love it, like, when they're zooming around, and it's great. Love it. But this one was, again, given gigantic expectations, and I didn't really get the analogy, because as someone who is trained in how to deal with school shooting situations, I didn't get the vibe of that feeling. And as someone who has unfortunately had to deal with, right-wing attacks on queer kids in schools, I didn't get that, because the attacks are subtle and draped in fake morality, but this was just a bunch of fascist dudes shooting at a school. So, like, the analogy didn't work in either way. I would have preferred if I just thought of it as a regular space battle. And also, if we're going on stories that I wasn't the biggest fan of, this is mostly a me thing. But I don't like it when I'm reading short story collections and the short stories come from other previously published or previously standing books. And it's totally a me thing, I get this, but so often my brain connects short story from a bigger book as subscribe to the newsletter or as go buy the book. I don't like a lot of short stories that are from bigger pieces of work because it's already hard. It's already hard enough to make a short story feel like it's not missing something, but when it's literally an excerpt from a bigger written story, that kind of increases it. And the one that struggled with that the most, I think, is named Those That Came First by Miles Nelson. And there was another one. I'm going to forget. But yeah, there was a lot of that kind of thing where it was like, this is from another story, and you could feel it. You could feel that there was elsewhere. And I don't know, I'm just not a big fan of that. My brain tends to view those kinds of short stories more as marketing than as their own standing work. I would have liked to see those authors maybe have come up with something separate that could have stood on its own. But in general, there was a lot of cool ideas in the book. Some minor typos, but like honestly kind of whatever. And I think if you don't view this as the be all end all of the trans autistic experience and you just be like, I would like to know about some more perspectives from this community, thank you, you'll probably have a good time with it. Like I mentioned before, it has such a wide range of genres that if you don't have a wide range of genre taste, there are probably going to be some stories in here that aren't your cup of tea. But I generally do have a wide range of taste. I just wish that we hadn't had quite the tonal whiplash as much as the other ones. But regardless, I gave the book 3 stars. It is important to note that I believe the editors are beginning editors. So I know they got some help from some other editors who have done anthologies before, but I definitely think that setting up the idea or the thesis so big is probably not helping. I think Ryan Vail was smart to change the way he spoke about the book when they spoke to me, and I would just change the setup on the Goodreads page and accept that you have a smaller point of view than, representing the entire community. It's just a handful of voices within that community. Still valuable voices, obviously, but not the definitive voice of the culture, so to speak. But with that in mind, if you go into it with those lower expectations, just looking to get some perspective from trans masked autistic voices, you'll probably have a good time. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.